Hello, everyone. This is JD Calderon, and this is Indy Comics Explained. Today, I'm talking to Mike Dubisch, the spectacular artist of many things. Great guy overall. So, Mike, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good, JD. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Now, Mike, to get right into it, why don't you let everybody know what have you done, and what are your passions in the industry?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've been pretty focused on the highly lucrative world of independent underground black and white horror comics since I was an adolescent. And yeah, with that has come all the expected riches and fame. But yeah, I've been ridiculously focused on that. Um, I have a few of the things I worked on over the years. Some people might remember some of these anthologies from the 80s.
Oh,
Uh,
Cry for Dawn. Wow.
Cry for
Gore Street.
Dawn. This was one of my first projects in the industry. Well, let me start real quick. I'll get back to Cry for Dawn. Here's Gore Shriek number
Gore
6.
Street.
This is my first published material. And I did this as a project for my art class in my junior year of high school.
Wow.
And it was simultaneously, it was also kind of a tryout for the Mars Attacks comics that were being published by the same publisher, Fantico,
Okay.
which was a local store in Albany, New York. But actually, I don't know all the history of it, but Fantico apparently was one of the very first of the underground alternative publishers back in the day. And they're still active doing versions of Gore Shriek and a couple of different types of horror fandom type literature. So I had shown. So here's another issue. I was in the Gore Shriek annual, also with another story that I wrote myself. And this one, by the time this came out, I was at the School of Visual Arts. So this was also. I think this might be like a clean 4 years later doing this in my junior year in art school. And somewhere in there, I met Joe Linsner, who had just started publishing Cry for Dawn.
Is that a first printing? That's worth a lot of money.
Is it? So this is.
I think they're worth about 150.
Is it? I used to have a stack of these around.
Wow.
I can't say that I did sell. I don't think I sold them for a lot of money, but I did sell them when they had accrued at least a little bit of extra value. So we could feel. And in this case, Joe Linsner had given me some rough layouts that I finished up. But what's especially neat about that is that a few years later, he drafted me to paint this project, which definitely isn't. This can still be found for cover price.
Yes.
But I think is fairly well loved especially by Joe's fans.
No, that's an awesome book, man. You did a great job on it. I have it. I have a copy of that somewhere.
This was actually, I believe, this was the tryout piece for it, and he printed it in the inside cover, or close to the inside front cover. And then these are the other panels from the trial page that he sent me to work on. But yeah, and it's kind of a neat thing because. It's got sort of my textures with Joe's drawings, and he went in there and touched it up to make them, sort of true Linsner works. But they're always one of my favorite collaborations. And just to sort of complete the early work, show and tell, there was just going back just a little bit. Some people may remember. For some reason, there was never a title logo. This is Shriek magazine. I don't know. I guess he was being edgy by not having a logo. You could sort of see Shriek right there. And this had in one issue had a story written by Bill Townsend, who was the owner of the comic book store that I worked in high school. And he did some other work for Gore Shriek and Fanico at the time.
Right.
And this one has a story that I wrote myself. It's got one of my earliest published full-page illustrations in it, right next to one of the first drawings by Clive Barker to ever appear in the U.S.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I have a copy of that somewhere, too.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It got pretty good distribution in that I would see it. I would see these issues in every comic book store.
Yeah.
So this is another one that actually I completed this one just before I went off to art school.
Okay.
So let's see, I think, right. And then I had one more of the early show and tell just to get it all out of the way. The last of the anthologies from this era that I appeared in, Raw Media Mag. This is published by Tim Vigil and the Faust crew over there. And in fact, now that I think about it, so this contained my story Among the Monsters, which was also written by my friend Bill Townsend, the shop owner of Electric City Comics in Schenectady, New York. So this one was done while I was at art school.
Cool.
So, all right. The early stuff.
The early stuff. All right, so let's hit upon some of the early stuff, because we got to know each other because you went to school with my wife.
Daphne.
Remember in Daphne in SVA. So I mean, okay. So did you do the 4-year course at SVA?
I did. Again, not to sound braggy, but I got a full scholarship to the School of Visual Arts, which was a thing that they did back in those days. I don't think they're often found, and I unfortunately, I don't even think the School of Visual Arts is still giving them out, which is a shame, because it was really kind of an institution of the school, was that some of us were the full scholarship winners. And honestly, even if you didn't get a full scholarship, they had a lot of generous scholarships back in those days. So yeah, I did the 4-year course. I was in Will Eisner's class with Daphne for one semester. I think we must have had other classes together, but that's the only one that I recall. But
were any of those other classes as important as Will Eisner's class?
Well, you know, I mean, it was so brag-worthy. And the thing about Will and his class at the school was that he had already written a couple of incredible books on making comics. So he'd already shared that with the world. So I think it was important to be in that class. And it was a thrill to be working with him. My feeling was, at that time, the energy level in the cartooning department at SVA overall was a little low compared to what I was seeing in the illustration departments. In the illustration classes, people were very competitive and would pack their painting that they'd spent the whole week noodling and getting every detail right and polished, making it into a fine polished jewel, and slap it up there on the wall and hope that it competed with everybody else's work. And generally, I didn't feel that in the cartooning classes. And I know now, as a more mature artist, that you bring your own energy, and you hope to impress the teachers. And it would have been very wise of me to take more cartooning classes and focus on comics, as I clearly had in my high school days. But in all honesty, I only took a couple of semesters of cartooning classes overall. and really focused on illustration and trying to learn how to do that amazing polish that I saw from or at least that I perceived as being an illustrator thing. And I think it happens to a lot of, we all have this sort of lifelong romance and relationship with comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, those go on the rocks. And, And while I was at the School of Visual Arts, while I was doing some comics, largely for financial reasons, on the side, I was sort of off my game in terms of, I was off my nerd game. I was not realizing that thinking about the cachet that came with working with some of these people, and certainly not imagining what a brief window there was there in the early 90s to get involved with the comic book industry when it was wide open, and use those contacts at the school and do good enough work as to impress the teachers, so that so they might say, hey, there's this person, there's a student I've got it, and talk to their people at DC. I mean, and I only say that because when I like the pre-interviews with people like I think specifically with Will was like, oh, you do well in the class. Maybe talk to you about getting some work at DC. So they would say that kind of thing, and that's really how open the industry was back then. He wasn't bullshitting, but of course you did have to come in there and impress them.
Right.
If you went in there a little low energy, then that wasn't going to do anything for you. So, and I think it's a general thing that somehow student work can sometimes be a little bit restrained, maybe compared to what someone who's really on fire and inspired can do outside of the classroom. At least that's how it was, or at least how it felt at the time for me. So anyway, little regrets I've been carrying around for a few decades.
Listen, okay. So what's funny is you mentioned you got a full scholarship, right? Daphne also she also ran on a full scholarship as well.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it was always a thing. It was like, oh, her parents were always happy because they never wanted her to be an artist, but it was like, well, she got it for free.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's great, and I'm not surprised. She worked so hard in school. Yeah. The first time I saw her, I went and introduced myself at. It was either a New York convention or more likely it actually probably was San Diego. And the first time she actually didn't remember me at all.
It's quite possible. Yeah. She
I think it was because she was working. I'd come into the Eisner class and she'd be the only one who actually had her work out and would be working on it.
Right.
So I think that was it. It was just she just had her nose to the grindstone. Right. I mean, my circle of friends at the school was pretty small too, because I was focusing on the work as well. But
I mean, it's school.
It's cool. Exactly, and. As you get older, you look back and some of it, I did a good job, and other times you're like, I was a punk, Jesus. But, especially now that I'm a university professor myself, and I just look back at some of the times I dropped the ball, and I was like,
yeah. Hey, listen, the mistakes of youth, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, you're young. That's
exactly
how it is. And I mean, and looking back at it again, I mentioned, this utter devotion to kind of the not profitable end of the industry. Right. And it really took me many, many years to, even though I kind of developed an interest in some mainstream comics in my late high school years, and just sort of promptly forgot about that, and certainly never really. It took me a long time to. as it turned out, I think it had a lot to do with skill level. Because at some point, I definitely jumped to a point where I was like, if I had a chance to draw some more mainstream comics, I would jump at the challenge and enjoy it. So I don't know if that's maturity or that's just having expanded my skill set to beyond horror comics to something to a level of skill where I could handle a superhero comic or a mainstream comic. But eventually I sort of, my interest expanded and I did think, I don't need to be just doing this kind of comic. However, that ship seems to have sailed, and I seem to be firmly established as doing this kind of comic. The closest thing to doing some stuff that was sort of quasi-mainstream was this series of Aliens versus Predator covers. This probably actually counts as among the early stuff because this stuff came around just a year or so out of art school.
Wow!
So
this stuff is impressive.
Well, thank you. And then also just the first year or the final year of art school and into the first years as a graduate, I worked on this project for Kitchen Sink Press called Flesh Crawlers. So there were 3 issues of this with painted covers. I'll just give a quick peek because hopefully this is interesting to your viewers to see how different this work was to what I was attempting to do, just a year or two, just a few years earlier. So I was definitely trying for a cleaner look. I was probably more capable of a cleaner look than I had been. But at the same time, I think in some ways this lacks a little bit of the energy and commitment that we see in some of those really early things. But
it's still awesome, man. I
appreciate it.
I know you're your toughest critic. Right? Because I'll sit back, oh, that looks great. And you're like, oh, damn it, look at Jesus. What did I do? But we're all like that. So, I see my own work.
It's really it's one of those things. The self-criticism is really strong right now in me. Again, not to keep bashing SVA in the visual arts in the 1989 to 1990 period, but the curriculum, and I'm sure it's gotten much. I'm sure the curriculum's gotten much more tightened up and elaborate. I mean, it's been oh my God, how long? It's been 30 years.
It's been a while.
I teach now at the online in the cartooning, comics, and illustration department at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and now, admittedly, an online class is set up almost like a detailed course book. But regardless, the level of content, useful content, is just super impressive. And when you compare it to classes where, the students would bring in their work and, we slap it up on the wall and have a quit for maybe an hour. Often these classes were supposed to be 3 hours long and everybody would just cut out after like an hour and a half.
Really? Was that even Will's class?
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, it's what I brought to it, and what we all brought to it. And I'm not going to specifically say that Will was cutting out a class an hour and a half. It may not have been Will specifically. So specifically, it should be understood he was only coming in every other class.
Right. Yeah. I remember that.
And a really great technician, Andre LeBlanc, was teaching the other half of the classes. And Andre was full of extremely useful just tips, just the little tips, that stuff like how to draw a nice looking eyebrow or ear, the kind of thing that students really, can really use a lot of. Our tutoring students. So yeah, I mean, I can hardly recall any lectures, and if you give a lecture, it'd be like a 5-minute lecture.
Right.
And you compare this to just the elaborate material that the Academy is offering about comics, about life drawing, about perspective. I mean, I'm teaching a perspective class right now that I just wish to God that I'd taken when I was in my 20s, because I mean, I'm just like, it's like, okay, I picked all this stuff up,
just later on,
and made use of it, but I never had a professor making me do it right. Giving me assignments to make me understand these concepts better. It was all, anyway, so yeah, I mean, so basically I'm kind of at this moment now where anytime, like at least 80% of backgrounds that I've drawn are now, I'm looking at them like, dude, E. minus maybe.
Got you. You're sitting there going, oh, ooh.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Like,
I have to, sometimes I have to stop and just be like, okay, look, you're not turning this in for your class, so it doesn't need this kind, I have a weird thing where so many students are working digitally now, and there's some things that I perceive as being easier digitally, so when I see them screwing it up, especially, I was just like, well, look, if you're working on paper, you just don't have these options. You can't pull all the way out and find a vanishing point over here and all over here and do layers and then turn off. There's none of that stuff. You work physically, you're putting down pencil lines, and then if it's the wrong line, you gotta erase it and redraw it. And if it's the right line, you gotta erase it later. And there's just all this stuff. All these challenges to working physically in traditional media that many of today's students don't have digitally, and yet they sometimes seem like they're still struggling in the same way.
Right.
And I suppose that's because these are a lot of inexperienced artists.
Yeah, they're still young.
They're I'm thinking of it from the point of view of an experienced artist jumping into a digital program and being like, wow, look what you can do. And these artists, these young artists or inexperienced artists are still, they're picking up Photoshop the same way I was picking up a pencil and paper and just trying to figure out how to do it without thinking, oh my gosh, look at how many problems this solves right here. It's just a lack of experience. So
if you really want to freak them out, hunt down some of Arthur Adams' grid prep pages online and just say, look, this is what this is his grid as to how, I don't know, have you ever seen him where he works out?
I've seen the results and yeah, I mean, it's just and I think that is one of the problems for students is to realize that the only way to get these kind of results is to work that hard, and that it is that hard, and it is that time consuming. Even for an experienced artist, there's just no way around it. And to be fair, when I get a very good student who's digital, I often feel that they put that yes, they're still putting in that kind of work to get their results. It just takes that kind of effort and work, and it can be hard. I think for students to, to really to get that, and it makes sense. I mean, students are also usually working on a deadline that might be a little tighter than some professional deadlines. I mean, I mean, I know that some of my best work is I'm working on it on and off for weeks or months, and these guys have to bring in results, the next day, which of course they should have to. I mean, it's a lot of professional jobs are going to have a tight deadline, and you do need, and it's really just this thing where I'll spend weeks or months on something is really just a self-indulgent older artist thing that I've just developed into.
So I'm gonna go over here, be an artiste. I got 3 lines done. Okay, I can go catch a beer now.
It's like I put the 3 lines down, and if I'm not feeling it, I'm not going to compromise the quality by continuing to work.
Right, yeah.
No, it's actually kind of the opposite. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good way to do this interview in my actual where I'm working area. But if I could, I'd show you that I have a strange thing where in order to paint one painting, I have to paint 5 or 6 paintings.
Oh, okay.
Because and 1 or 2 of those will be the important ones that have a client and a deadline, and the others are just fun things that I've sort of been working up over time. And I need to do the phases on these less I don't want to say less important, but the more important. I have to do the phases on these and kind of get into a zone for that phase of painting. And when I'm there, I can then jump into
the main job.
Into the client-based work. So that seems really bizarre, but it's just over time that's been what's happened.
Your process.
I mean, it's it is a little it's kind of like it seems like it's like, well, that's a little timid that you got to like warm up on these other things, but it's like it's actually in order to sort of break through the timidity to the where I'm feeling comfortable with paint and getting these pieces of paper wet and doing shit with the paint, and just having a feel for it. I somehow have to have a few, just different things around I can experiment on.
Yeah, I have a friend, and he was he knew a guy who once went to interview Isaac Asimov, and he said you walk into Isaac Asimov's, I don't know if it was his den or his living room. He had 7 typewriters in a circle, each of them with a story that he's working on.
Right.
So he would work on one. All right, I'm a little tired of this one. Let me go.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me.
Well, I met at an age even younger than any of this stuff that I just showed you, but only a few years younger. I actually met Asimov. He was sort of hosting or providing the theme for some sort of art contest at some sort of institution. I wish I had photos or anything. I remember. I could probably remember the name of the contest if I thought for a little longer. And I didn't win, but I did get to go on stage and shake his hand. And now I'm thinking he passed some sort of curse on to me of like, you'll never be able to focus on one thing and get it done beginning to end. No, you've got the curse. The only way for you to be productive is to work on a whole bunch of things at once. As your mind, as you run out of steam or your mind wanders, or you step up to the desk and you can only concentrate on this one thing, even if these other things were more important. And I don't know, maybe there was some sort of transference of consciousness there.
Was a good
I know that he worked like that, but that is very, very similar to that's definitely the writing version of my approach.
Your process.
Isn't it great to imagine, to think of him with all those typewriters, and that's how he's pounding out the work.
Yep.
The modern mind immediately goes, why didn't he just have 8 folders on his laptop?
Right. Yeah.
And that's how a modern writer would do it.
Right. Of course.
And yet that doesn't at all feel. That's like, okay. So the writer's got 8 folders with stuff that he's working on. That doesn't at all feel like what I'm doing. as compared to what Asimov was doing with the actual physical typewriter and a physical piece of paper that he's working on to write this specific story at this specific moment when he sits in front of that particular machine. And that's definitely more my groove.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you have that tactile feel, there's that, you feel that emergence, like you feel like, you see these things and you feel like you have to work. It's not like you can see your computer, you're like, do I want to play a video game or do I want to work? Or do I want to go on Facebook? You understand? But if you see old school, because I worked on typewriters, and you just see that machine and it's staring at you, and it's like, you need to come over here and give me some attention.
Yes.
And that's all it did. That's the only thing that you can do on that machine.
Sit down at the typewriter and be like, oh, now I got I got a little game going.
Exactly. No, you're working.
Yeah, no, that's what I have. That's what I like with my paintings. I line them all up, or I'll line the drawings up, and certainly hope that when I step up to the desk, that one of these things calls out to me and says, this is actually what you want to do right now, is work on this piece.
Right.
And that's definitely the vibe that I hope to capture when I step up. There's nothing worse than that feeling of just sleepiness or lethargy when you sit down on a piece and yet you're telling yourself this is the piece that needs to get done right now. And it's just it's the polar opposite, and all us creatives know it. There's that great feeling of being creative and having it work. And then that worst feeling of the world is that feeling like when you feel that you're supposed to be working, you're supposed to be being productive and creative, and you're just not feeling it.
Right. Yeah. That's...
And it's a common problem. But what it comes down to is the old cliche that an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So if you can just get that ball rolling, it'll start coming, and the next thing you know, it didn't matter that you spent hours on this thing that was not the deadline piece, because once you hit that point where you've done as much as you needed to for that day or wanted to, that you're so much more in the zone and ready to put in productive time on the important work. So the only problem is with sometimes running out of time, hectic life. But yeah, that's a goal, and that's exactly it. That the work should call out to you, and that's one of my methods of staying creative is to have a pile of drawings started, usually almost always without any particular goal when I started on the pieces of paper. Usually, very often, just sketch in a couple of figures and just start to see what's happening.
Right.
Let the story be told to me. And again, this sort of thing can take weeks, months, or years for the drawing to start to come together. But if I've got that pile of art, in a way, it's what a lot of artists, or what I think of as younger artists, doing with their sketchbook, where they just do a lot of exploring in their sketchbook. I've just taken the binding out of the process and have these things on watercolor paper or nice Bristol or nice Kokio board, and so I can bring it to a full illustration. But it's still very much like that old idea of, you've got your sketchbook, you got a lot of ideas brewing, and you just flip through it and just start working in whatever page, calls out to you.
We have a guest in the chat. His name is Rod. He's mad cool. He's in Costa Rica. He has another podcast. He's mad cool, this guy. Do me a favor, Mike. Hold up some of your artwork, because I don't think you got to see some from me.
Okay. Let me continue the tour.
There you go.
I continue to appear in anthology comics. So it was nice to appear in the Frank Frazetta Fantasy Illustrated magazine. This is the first time that I got my artwork underneath a Frank Frazetta cover. And my name, there we go. My name on a Frank Frazetta cover. And also, it means, I like to think it means that Frank Frazetta saw my artwork once.
I'm sure. Yeah, like we can hope that he went through the magazine.
So yeah, exactly. I'd like to think that he did.
Right.
So this story never saw print anywhere else. It was called The Necromancer's Victory.
Nice.
I wrote it. I wrote it and scripted it. For some reason, they hired a script doctor to come in and rewrite the script. I don't know. I don't think he was credited at all, so I don't know who it was. He did a good job. I liked how he reinterpreted what I did. And these were actually done in acrylic, even though they have a kind of a washy look. That it's definitely the same style that I do my watercolors in these days. So this was a 6-page painted story in Frank Frazetta. It probably didn't show up that great on screen. But anyway, yeah. So this here's yet another time that I was on a Frazetta cover, The Creeps. And yeah, they were still putting the artist's name on the cover too. So there's again my name on a Frazetta painting. So very, very cool for me. And this stuff should show up pretty well on screen. I think it's the light is just wrong here, but
that's good.
Yeah, this. So The Creeps is basically Creepy Magazine reborn, and it's very, for me, all of this started. I was just a regular kid who liked superheroes, or at least I thought I was.
Right.
Until around 5th or 6th grade, when I read the biography of William Gaines. My parents had some of the cool little paperback EC Comics reprints around, so I was familiar with the EC Comics.
Right.
After reading the biography, I really became obsessed with EC Comics, even though I was well aware that they hadn't been published since the 50s. In my mind, that's what I wanted to grow up to be, was an EC Comics artist. So somehow The Creeps manages to fill its pages with just incredible artwork by a lot of great artists. Again, you know, indie horror comics is not a way to make a lot of money. But I think that everybody kind of pulls out all the stops regardless on this project. And so anyway, just somehow the format of the horror host, you know, just sort of introducing the story, and then usually finishing it up too at the end. There's just something about that just tickles me, and I love it so much. It just kind of makes everything that much more fun. Yeah. In fact, my frequent collaborator Cody Goodfellow,
Mr. V, awesome book.
Thank you. We ended up producing this whole book in that format with a horror host and a short comic chapter for each host. Except that in this case, it's a faux anthology. In fact, all the stories link together to create one world, one narrative. Yeah,
that's cool.
But it's just a send up of the meat and fast food industry. There we go, and a tribute to EC Comics, and more specifically the underground horror comics that were inspired by the EC Comics.
Now, out of the EC Comics groups, I mean, because I when I was a kid, I also picked up some of those old reprints of the EC Comics. Love those things. Out of all of those, who is the artist from those books that you remember the most vividly that you think inspired you?
I would say probably I have a pantheon of my favorite EC artists. I would say probably the first one who really captured my imagination was Graham Ingalls. Again, that love of horror and him being really the ultimate horror artist, horror comic book artist. In my mind, I paused for like half a beat thinking, do I say that the best horror artist until Bernie Wrightson, or do I just make it just a thing?
Right.
The love of Bernie Wrightson, I think, goes hand in hand with the love of EC Comics, and fortunately, kind of a similar book, the Creepshow adaptation, came out around those formative years too. So it was just really fun to see Bernie handling that EC style stories, all written by Stephen King, and that was just a brilliant, inspiring book. But yeah, and I think that's Bernie at his most Graham Inglesy as well. And I don't think I'm the first one to say that, but I really, so there was Graham Ingalls, but I'd also have to say that somewhere in there, I learned a lot of the inking lessons of Wally Wood. And honestly, it's almost like I don't know how anyone would ink without having some knowledge of Wally Wood. It sort of had the ultimate comic book inking style that applied to anybody's pencils, made them look a million times better. And it felt kind of photorealistic, but at the same time, it clearly felt like a system that he was just the classic cartooning style of just kind of being able to pull this out of the air and just putting the right lines on paper to make things feel solid and bold and realistic. So those would probably be the top two. However, I was just really obsessed and would definitely, I'd have a day where I'd be like, and it wasn't as easy to find EC reprints back then. If I had the money, there were the big complete sets that were in black and white, and man, that would have been a cool thing to have at that age. But I never really pursued owning those. What came out was about a kind of a magazine-sized color thing.
Those are the ones I have.
Yeah.
And
the colors are terrible because it's the old colors that are meant for newsprint, printed on super white Mando paper. But on the other hand, those were really durable, really nice quality, good crisp lines. I have all of those still, and they're still in excellent shape despite all the reading that I've given them. So at least we had those. It was kind of frustrating because, I mean, basically, what was it? Just maybe about, I don't know not too long after art school. So basically, still in the early or mid 90s with the Gladstone. Gladstone lost the Disney license and got the EC license. And suddenly they're just pumping these things out. And there's issues all over the place. And I mean, at some point, I bought a stack. I couldn't keep up with them. I bought a stack of them from the quarter bins. I'm not sure if I ever finished reading even what I had. And it's such a shame because I would have eaten it up just 10 years earlier. But anyway, anyway, EC is so much easier to find now. So I am glad that obviously there's continues to be an audience, and presumably a modern audience and a younger audience that appreciates EC Comics. And of course, I have bought some of the nice black and white reprints. For those who need digital color, there's some newly digitally colored versions out there that I'm sure look good to the audience that they're meant for. Comic book coloring is a funny subject because I honestly used to hate how comic books were colored. And even when I was working, again, in my teens, another lucky break, I ended up working for a comic book coloring studio.
Which one?
Most of the stuff that was done for Marvel and DC, ironically, in that studio, was done after I left and went to art school. It was with Tom Vincent, he's just colored like you can't even imagine how many Marvel books he's colored. but yeah. So anyway, I mean, I even remember, I was like asking him, why were the colors like, he had to explain, something's like, why do they use that weird gray as the shadow on flesh tone? And now, again, as a mature artist, or I don't know if it says a mature artist, or I can't even separate it, I don't think, from the nostalgia anymore. Because all those old comics look great to me now.
Right.
And I can't stand digital coloring. But when I focus and I look, I realize that the digital colorists are doing probably what I would have thought was more accurate, using maybe more browns and pink to shade flesh. And these people are unlikely to have the sophistication to use blue in the shadows or do any of the stuff that some of the comic book colorists of the old days would do. And Jose Villaruba, I think that's how you say it.
That's it.
He's been doing some regular posts on his blog and on Facebook, comparing these things, and it's funny because on one hand I'm on board with it. I'm like, but then at some point I started really asking myself, how much of it is nostalgia for how things used to be? Because I started to think, some of these slick computer colorings, it looks odd to me, but when I try and take away my personal nostalgia and prejudices from it, I think the modern audience is going to find those colors easier to look at, to understand, and to digest. And even myself, at a young age, I might have appreciated that more saturated, more rendered approach. That and now it's all about, at our age, with the nostalgia, we look at it, we're like, we love all the flat colors, we love the all the use of cyan and magenta and all this stuff, that it's just like, I have to remind myself that back in that day and that actual era, it all looked so limited, and that's why we were attracted to stuff like heavy metal and Epic Illustrated, because in the fully painted comics and the European comics where they use watercolors to color them and stuff like that, that stuff looked way more sophisticated and way more finished. And it was understood to be that, and it wasn't necessarily understood that the assembly line process was to create a
product,
a certain look. And now we look at it and it's like, wow, it's just drawing has changed so much. Partly it is because the colorists were doing very sophisticated things at times with a very limited system. But a lot of that stuff looks, or some of it is just that, I don't know, that the newsprint comics just maybe scan into the computer really well, and it just looks really good. And then you actually get those newsprint comics in front of you, and it's still that same old feeling of this thing being kind of shoddily produced, and not really living up to maybe the whole potential that's there. When it comes to mainstream comics, I often find, especially contemporary stuff, that I love the pencils, but I'm not interested at all in how it's been inked and colored. But if I look at the pencils, I go, wow, this is really detailed. It's really cool and inspiring. But that finish is somehow turning me off.
Gotcha. Yeah. What's funny is I actually miss, finely inked works. Because now, usually you'll see guys, and now what they're doing is just one thin line. It's just one line weighing on the whole thing. And it's just like, okay, boom. All right, let the colorists do their thing.
Exactly, because and there's a logic to that. Because frankly, it does. This is one of the reasons why the old comics look a little weird with all that rendering, all that digital color rendering. Yeah, and it's because it doesn't need it. It's because they've worked in all these fine feathering lines that should be allowed to be what's defining the form and defining the look of the image. And the colors just sort of drown that out. I agree. So yeah, I mean, a cleaner look. I suppose just the fact that if a closed line can more easily have a paint bucket, of color
just dropped in there, yeah,
dropped into it, and so the old-fashioned feel of lines breaking up is less often seen. So yeah, I mean, the craft has changed.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I heard Kelly Jones interview with him. He was like, "Listen," he said he would tell his colorists. He says, "Listen, black is a color." So he's like, "Don't touch," because they like to transform the blacks into colors, and I guess with him, he's like, "Don't touch my black." It's like you color everything else. Do not touch the black.
Yeah, I imagine. Kelly is not only someone who uses a lot of black. He uses a lot of core. He's pretty much the artist for core shadows to define the form. And so, the wrong coloring is really going to mess with stuff. And I mean, it's one of my biggest problems with digital colors is that they'll often not understand how the contrast of the image is supposed to work. And we'll even completely reverse it. Like, I don't even know how you did that. How did you make... this is supposed to be dark forms against light, and I get it back, and it's light form against darks, and it's like how is this happening? But again, there is just a certain matter of taste there, and
I mean, we're fighting.
I try and let it go. If I once somebody is digitally coloring my work, I try and let it go and accept that it's now partially in their hands.
But hopefully they have sun sensibilities as the colors are going to.
Yeah, I mean, but also with the understanding that even if I don't like it, that doesn't mean that this might be exactly how other people want to see the work presented. So
true.
Yeah.
Okay, we're running on close to an hour, so I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and then we'll close up. So, we got a couple of standard ones. So, one, you don't really have like a regular comic series you work on. So, I'll phrase it like this: if you could get a piece of artwork from an artist living a dead sand, and you get one piece, and you get this piece of artwork, who would it be from?
Oh, that's so tough. I'm a huge Frank Frazetta fan, and of course, from a strictly financial point of view, owning a Frazetta. But yeah, I mean, just if I was never going to sell it, I'll take your question as that. Own it and be the caretaker till the end of your life. I mean, the Bernie Wrights and Frankenstein pages, I think, are right up there. But what I really love are Frank Frazetta's watercolors. And he didn't do a lot of them. But when he did, he just somehow transferred that fine rendering style that he used in his early pen and inks directly into color. And they're just amazing. So there's one of a classic sci-fi, male-female couple, and they're stepping up to some sort of mushroom land, and there's a golem-like character stepping towards them. That one's gorgeous. I'd love to own that. I think I could look at that forever. Probably any of his watercolors, but that one. But if it was not a watercolor, I think that several of his pen and inks, most specifically the famous Funnies ones that were, I guess, related to Rogers, would be right up there. So yeah, those that probably easily be either a Wrightson or Frazetta from one of those eras. But I also find Richard Corbin fascinating. I find Bassio Wolverton fascinating. And outside of comics, I find Durer. Absolutely, Durer. I should say it in German accent. I think understood. I find his woodcuts to be absolutely fascinating. But yeah.
All right, now here's an interesting. Well, I don't know. It depends. You may like it, you may not. So if you had the golden ticket to do any book at Marvel or DC, any character, anything, they say you can do whatever you want, Mike.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
Swamp Thing. Hands
Oh,
down.
you do Swamp Thing. Okay.
It would start with Swamp Thing way up here, and
Right.
and everything else on a much lower level.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I have some fondness for. I have some deep fondness for Spider-Man, and some later fondness for Batman. Though I kind of got to a point with Batman where I don't think I ever want to read another Batman comic. It's gotten so tiresome. I can't really say I don't feel the same way about Spider-Man. Every time you read a Spider-Man comic, you just feel sad. It's just like it's like they killed everything that I remember about the character, and it's just a completely different thing. But that being said, something old school. I don't know. Those are my favorite characters in terms of the mainstream books. Yeah, Swamp Thing's way up there. But I mean, you could stretch. I mean, Tomb of Dracula would certainly be a revival I'd be interested in. Conan would be way up there, and would probably be, in terms of like what I ended up for a little while there. I think I would have said Conan was probably the because I was doing a lot of work for Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. For a little while there, I think Conan would have been the most obvious choice. So just
knowing your work, I Conan would have been wow.
Yeah,
that would have been incredible to see.
It'd be pretty neat, and of course, it's it could still happen someday.
Yeah, this is true. Listen, we're not in the grave yet. We still got time. We can do stuff.
It's the way things are. It's just like it's almost like some sort of seventh circle of hell thing. It's be like, okay, you get to draw Conan, but it's Conan in the Avengers.
Oh yeah, right.
Like Marvel Disney, and it's like. No,
right. You get to draw what is it? Squirrel Girl and Wolverine with him.
Yeah, exactly. It would be something like that. I mean, even the last couple of runs of Swamp Thing, I started to be like, damn, I think I would find this a little tedious to draw. It's like it's getting out of that range of where I enjoy the character. It just. They weren't bad, and gosh, I mean, at this point, even those are going. I'm thinking of the Rot World stuff that connected with Animal Man in '52, and they weren't bad, and they had a lot of the same kind of cool Swamp Thing stuff. But at the same time, they still felt a little corporate, a little modernized, and it didn't quite have that magic of certainly not of the Alan Moore run, the Rick Veitch run. Even some of the later runs, I don't know who was writing them, but I remember Phil Hester was the penciler. Even those, I don't know. At some point, I got a stack of them out of the quarter bin or something. Phil Hester's a great artist and great writer whose work I didn't think was all that super in that run of Swamp Thing, but it was interesting. And I think they got some different inkers in at times, so that was always fascinating to see the same penciler handled by different inkers. But if I recall correctly, but anyway, even those had, and I don't know, maybe that was Nancy Collins run. Somebody else have to look it up for me. I think some issues that were drawn by an Argentine artist, Breccia, who's great, and that was a cool run too. So there've been so many great runs of Swamp Thing, and 90% of them are ones that I think I would have enjoyed illustrating. I don't know where they're going with the character now.
So let me ask you, as we close out, what are you working on now? What are you doing now that we're going to see hopefully in the next few months?
First of all right, so here, this actually is cool because I can finish up my show and tell. So this is available right now. This is a graphic novel I did in, I think I spent most of 2019 on it. might have been 28. It seems take a while, but I've got I did all of the graphic novel pages, and it's colored by Phil Mucci.
Nice.
Phil is a filmmaker and comic book enthusiast, and he's got a whole world built around this character. And so this thing is just really wild, really undergroundy, very violent at times. Just kind of.
It looks very pulpy.
Yeah, it's just for him, it's a tribute to a lot of Italian horror movie tropes, and he just put everything into it. And I just really worked to bring his vision to life. But they've been a joy to work with. This book is still available at ProfessorDarioBava.com and or DiabolicFilms.com will get you there too. This is a project, The Wet Nurse. It's a story I wrote myself. This edition came out from Strange Eons magazine kind of a while ago now. I forget. 2012, it says in here somewhere. So it's actually pretty old already. We are working to put this back into print, or at least have it available as an ebook. Now, the industry has been kind of got a kick in the gut from the quarantine. So I also recently fulfilled another lifelong dream by appearing in Slow Death Zero. Slow Death is one of the classic underground horror comics that Rich Corbin, Greg Irons, all the classic horror undergrounders all appeared in. In like 20 years, there's only been, I think, more than maybe 40 years or something. Right. In fact, I remember now the first issue came out around the same year that I was born. So literally, the comic the Slow Death anthology has been around for 48 years and has 12 issues. So they are putting out Slow Death Zero, and I was lucky enough to be able to contribute again with stories written by Cody Goodfellow. So that was supposed to come out in time for San Diego Con 2020. I believe it's right now delayed because of these problems. And that's the same story with my new anthology, Forbidden Futures magazine. So Forbidden Futures, I bring it up together because Strange Eons has given Forbidden Futures the go-ahead to run with the reprint of The Wet Nurse. We will probably try, because of the circumstances, we'll probably try and release it as a digital flip book that will be available on my website and the Forbidden Futures website. So this is my current big project. This is a quarterly science fiction horror literary magazine. And I do all of the artwork. We're on issue 7 now. 7 again is where we're hitting our problem with the quarantine and with printers. The same thing that Last Gasp is experiencing with Slow Death. So unfortunately, the print copies of the next couple of issues are delayed for the time being. Hopefully, that's not a permanent situation. But there are 6 issues of Forbidden Futures. I will show you the covers real quick. This issue prints my graphic novel, The Crypt Kid. I'll give you a quick flip through. So some pages. The Crypt Kid I published as an independent one-shot, and Oddness wanted to take it up and publish it, and what I suggested instead was that we publish an anthology magazine and include comics as I get them finished. We will be putting out a collection of the Crypt Kid now that in the current issue we publish, which is issue 6. In issue 5 we did Crypt Kid Part 2. It was actually it was what I conceived to be issues 2 and 3.
Right.
So there's a lot of Crypt Kid comics in here and a few stories. But anyway, what Forbidden Futures is primarily, when it's not a vehicle for publishing my graphic novels, is we take finished art by me, some of the stuff that, like I said, I'm working on for weeks or months or years, and we give those to writers, and they write original short fiction based on my artwork. In addition to the Crypt Kid issues, we had a special Lovecraft issue, was issue 2. A special fantasy issue, issue 3.
Nice.
An all female writer issue for issue 4. And a special space opera science fiction issue for issue 6. Every issue has a centerfold. We started out, the idea was for every issue to have a sexy centerfold, like a Playboy magazine. I think that's fallen by the wayside. I don't know if it's because I ran out of sexy females, or if the art director just got tired of the theme. But basically, this current issue, we being the space opera issue, we borrowed NASA color scheme. And this is a piece of art that I did right out of art school that never saw print. Whereas this is a piece I did as a demo for the Academy of Art University just a couple years ago. And here's some NASA schematics being the design. And then, and here's a piece that I completed just a few months ago. So we really get to use all kinds of art. This is about, clearing out my stockpile, giving me a venue so that there's a purpose for me to be constantly producing these pieces of artwork. And
nice. Now, what kind of print run are you doing on these?
That information may be confidential.
Okay. No, that's fine.
It's not a huge print run. And I would say that when I proposed the magazine, my main idea was that this be subscriber based, that we're not necessarily trying to, at least to start out with, to get every issue into every store, or to depend on that kind of sales, hopefully someday. But right from the start, we wanted to offer this as a subscription and work on printing for our subscriber base and printing with the intention of selling out. So once we have, it started out as every year we were going to put out an omnibus. I think that due to a printer snafu at the year mark, the omnibus is probably going to include all of the short fiction and illustration from the first 2 years when it ultimately comes out, with the graphic novel elements subtracted to be printed and published separately. So the Crypt Kid will come out separately from the omnibus. The omnibus will have all of the short stories and art in it. It's really, in some cases, some stuff has been repurposed. Things that only got web publication got to see print with News Story.
Are you looking at crowdfund any of these, or you're just
These are not crowdfunded. We started with a benefactor. Who provided seed money to get us going, and it's all being done through Oddness, who's been. They started out as a client that was just giving me illustration work, and who I met at a convention, I think at the WonderCon around 2009 or so, and we published at least a half a dozen different books together before we started this venture. He basically took my art and ended up repackaging all of his projects, and we went with that for a while. But now we're entirely now Oddness is entirely focused on Forbidden Futures.
Cool. No, that looks incredible.
Thank you. We just have a new website up for forbiddenfutures.com. We'll get you there.
All right. So that was the question I was going to ask you. So where can people reach you, see your work, get a hold of this fantastic stuff, and get a hold of you?
Yeah, definitely forbiddenfutures.com. I've just launched MikeDubisch.com, and that connects directly to my Facebook. Facebook.com/Mike Dubisch is a great way to reach me. But yeah, and any of those, if you message or Forbidden Futures on Facebook is another great way to message me if anyone needs to reach me.
Cool. Well, all of those links will be in the show notes, so people will be able to reach out, find your work, buy your work. I'm going to definitely have to go, and I have some of that stuff. I don't have all of that stuff, and I'm definitely going to pick up some more of it because the stuff looks incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Jamie.
So thank you so much, everybody. I'll be talking to all of you soon, and it was a pleasure speaking to you, Mike, and I'll be talking to you soon, all right?
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Have a good night, everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.